Hello everyone, in this video I'm doing a Season 8 Kings Canyon drop location tier list. I'll be covering all 20 named locations, ranking them from D to S tier. The reason there's not actually any F tier is because I don't think there's any F tier locations on the Kings Canyon map. I won't be going super into detail about every location, otherwise this video would be extremely long, but I do cover some useful tips for each area. Real quick, only 1% of my viewers are actually subscribed, so if you end up enjoying this video, feel free to click that button down below. So with all that said, let's start with the very worst locations and work our way up all the way to the very best. Let's talk about Bunker. If you're a caustic, then this is obviously an S tier location, maybe even a double S or like triple S. It's like the obvious 100% landing spot. But if you're anybody else or you don't have any defensive legends, this is not a place you want to land. It's very easy to get pinched from either side. As you can tell, if a team lands above you and underneath of you, you're just in the middle, and there's nothing you can do. You'll simply die. But obviously, if you have a caustic, you'll be able to hold off those teams because of your defense. The loot here is pretty mediocre. You only have a few small rooms to loot from. Unless you're landing here completely solo, you definitely want to avoid this area. The next spot on the list is Broken Relay. This place is nothing special. Landing here, you're not going to get very much loot. You're definitely going to need to loot other places, and since you'll be late to those areas, it's very likely you'll die pretty soon off spawn. You can definitely expect teams from Capacitor, Rig, or Artillery to come and try to third party you here, and you definitely don't have the best paths to run away. So I would recommend avoiding landing at Broken Relay unless you plan on third partying the Rig. If you plan on landing on Broken Relay and then third partying Rig, it's one of the most powerful third parties you can take in this game, but that's definitely a risky play as well. The next spot on the list is Hydro Dam. This is one of those landing spots that's not very popular, and for good reason. The loot here is pretty tragic. Chances are you won't even leave here with 2 blue shields. The actual layout is horrible. There's so much open space, so few buildings to actually land on and loot. Basically every single time you land here, you're going to need somewhere else to finish looting. That could be swamps, repulsor, cage labs. But again, if you're walking out of this area with low tier loot, chances are you're going to walk into a team with higher tier loot in another place. And chances are they're going to kill you. Next spot we're going to talk about is the Mirage Voyage ship. This is another new addition to Season 8. If I'm going to be honest, this place is very fun, but very dangerous. Mostly due to the third partying. It's so easy to be third party by Gauntlet or Salvage because the balloon tower is directly above you. If you can land here first, there's a high chance you'll end up getting some good loot, but after the second, third, maybe even fourth team, you're just going to start to run out of loot way too quick. And it's eventually going to lead to your demise almost every time. Yeah, this is not cool. This is just annoying. It's obnoxious. Why did they think this was a good idea? How is this helping the audio? There's a guy there. There's literally a man there. I heard not a single peep of audio because that music was playing. That's a prime example of why this place is unfortunate. Let's get the fuck out. Alright, the next spot on the list is going to be the cage. Now, even though I landed here and ended up getting my best game ever at 26 kills and 5,000 damage, most of you have probably already seen it. I'll put a card up in the corner. But regardless of that, this area is one of my least favorite places. Mostly because you're not going to get enough loot out of this area. The actual design of the area is not bad, I like the layout, but you're just not going to find enough loot. The main concern is simply, it's too easy to third party the area, too difficult to run away, and since you won't have enough loot, you're not going to really have what it takes to fight the teams that push you. There's nothing in the area that you can run to find more loot. You can run to labs, Hydro Dam, or repulsor, but the issue is the majority of the time all of these places will already have been landed on, so you're not actually going to find a lot of loot in those areas. Market, it can pass in some situations, but the majority of the time it's probably going to let you down. So the main 2 reasons why Market is so unfortunate is because there's basically 2 places for you to land. You have one entrance through the roof on the back and another entrance through the roof on the front. And because of this, you're basically split 50-50. If you end up having a team land with you, you're basically just going to compete for loot. So whoever ends up getting the better stuff is basically going to win. So because it's so 50-50, it's definitely very risky to land here. I think another main thing is the loot in market is not actually very good, and it's definitely not very consistent. Sometimes you'll get guns that spawn somewhere over here, and other times you'll land here with no weapon at all. So it's just not very consistent. It's not a place you can reliably go to and expect to get good stuff. I think the last main point about market is that it's very easy to third party this place. If you take a look, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 places that are usually going to make rotations towards market. So since market's in the center of a bunch of hotspots, it becomes a prime location for third partying. And if you land here, don't get the best loot, and just continuously get third partied, it's not going to be fun at all. And artillery is another C tier. The biggest reason I'm placing artillery so low is because of the poor loot. You might think that there's a lot of loot here since there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas that you can find loot, and then there's even some bins scattered around, but the amount of loot you'll find in any of these buildings is way too scarce. On top of that, you'll rarely find any purple shields or any golden attachments in this area. I just feel like the loot definitely needs a buff. Other than that, another big factor is that there's always way too many teams landing here. Artillery is an extremely common hot drop as well, so you'll usually have 2 or 3 teams landing here, and you just won't have enough loot to fight all of them. On top of that, if you get third party by somewhere like crash site, containment, rig, or capacitor, you're just not going to have enough healing or enough loot in general to survive past all of those teams. So yeah, this place is definitely not the worst as long as you have a solid drop path, but because of the poor loot, I'm going to keep artillery in the C tier. So the next place on the list is going to be airbase. Airbase I'm going to put into the solid B tier, mostly because you'll usually be able to land here fairly secluded. If you're not completely alone, you'll usually only have at max about 1 team. Because of this, you'll be able to comfortably loot up. Also, the loot is very consistent. The loot is dispersed perfectly. You can always expect some good loot out of this area. The third party potential of this area is pretty low because your backside is completely alone. You do have to worry about these 3 locations though. I'm trying to do a commentary. Alright, leave me alone. What the hell? Bro, stop it. You fucking idiot. You dumbass. Get him out. Oh, this guy's coming in. I stuck him. Oh my god, okay. Alright, so as I was saying, the third-party potential of this place is pretty low. You only have to worry about runoff, this no-name town, and gauntlet. You don't have to worry about your back whatsoever. And because there's these very nice rotations on zip lines, you can easily run away from any third parties that you have to deal with if you're not fully equipped. The next area on the list is going to be runoff. The perks of runoff are that the loot is very high quality, and you rarely have to worry about third parties. It's very difficult to third party from Spotted Lake, and Pit has a difficult run up, so it's not very frequently that you'll see third parties. Since you're very secluded, you'll be able to loot up in freedom the majority of the time, but the only flaws are that it can get quite difficult competing for loot if teams land on you. Primarily because runoff is made up of a series of hallways. It's very easy to get trapped in any of these hallways when you're trying to find guns. Because of that, it's pretty easy to die off spawn. That's the only major flaw of runoff though, so that's why it's going to stay in the B tier. So the next spot let's talk about is Repulsor. Repulsor suffers from a similar problem that artillery suffers from in that there's not usually enough loot in this area. It's not nearly as bad, but you'll definitely notice it if you have 1 or 2 teams landing with you. Generally, I find it a bit difficult to get myself fully kitted out of this area. Because of that, I'll usually be scrounging for more loot in places like Crypto, Map Room, or on the diving board. That's something you don't really want to see off spawn in pubs or in ranked, so that's the main reason why this area doesn't score very high. Another reason I don't like this area is the layout. There's so much open space between any of the areas, which makes fighting very awkward. Third party potential is pretty high if you're looking at somewhere like Crypto Map Room, through Hydro Dam, even anywhere from water treatment can come and try to third party you here. So I would recommend staying away from this area, but it's still going to get a B on the tier list. Alright, so the next spot we're going to talk about is salvage, and this is one of my favorite areas to land, mostly because it has some really fun and solid rotations during pubs. Using this jump tower, you can easily rotate to the Voyage ship or to the Octane town takeover. You can also rotate towards these people who are fighting right now in a matter of seconds using either one of these jump towers. One of the other main things I like about this area is the loot placement. Though it can get very chaotic and extremely competitive if you land on any of these bunkers right here. All of the houses usually have a fair amount of loot. If you can be the first team in, you can usually be the last team out. Damn, that's actually a good saying. Okay, this is one of the areas I don't recommend landing during ranked, just because finding loot can be a little tricky, but during pubs, it's definitely a fun place to land, especially if you're going for high kill games. Alright, next up, let's talk about spotted lakes. The three main reasons for this being an A tier are that the loot is very well placed. This area is very, very large, meaning you can find a ton of loot. This also means that if you have a team landing on you, you'll be able to selectively loot your own locations without running into them right away. This means you'll be able to loot up before you have to fight, and that's always a good thing. One of the downsides of landing spotted lakes are that the third parties are pretty difficult to avoid. Since you're walled off from the back, and you have pit to worry about on your side, it's pretty difficult to run away from any third parties. Because there's a lot of open space and you have nowhere to run on your back, it's pretty easy to get caught by a third party after fighting in spotted lakes. But with the amount of loot you can grab from this area, it's not very likely that you'll end up losing. So the next up on the list is going to be pit. Or the pit. The primary reasons that pit is an A tier location are that the loot is very, very consistent. You always know where it spawns. It's literally all in these bins, and they are always in the same location. You'll find some occasional loot on the floor. You can definitely expect 1 or 2 purples from this area. And of course, the third party potential here is extremely low. If you look at it, you might think you're boxed in by a bunch of areas, but that's actually not the case. Pushing into pit is pretty rare, mostly because of the fact that the rotations are pretty out of the way. You can usually expect third parties from runoff, but anywhere around spotted lakes or containment, you'll rarely see any third parties. Another great reason to land pit is that it has 4 rotations out of the area. If you want more loot, you can loot spotted lakes, runoff, bunker, or even move to the no-name town over here. Another plus side to pit is this area right here. It might seem like a small, meaningless little house, but it actually has a secret. If I can find it. I swear. There it is. The last bin I opened. This area is guaranteed to hold at least 1 golden item. That could be a weapon, it could be an attachment, or it could be some kind of equipment. You'll always get at least 1 guaranteed golden item from this area. And it's just 5 steps away from pit, so it's definitely an added bonus. So the next landing spot is Hydro Dam. I'm going to rate Hydro Dam an A, mostly because it has very solid rotations out of the area, as well as you rarely get third party to here. And obviously the loot inside is great, but it does slightly suffer from the same issue that runoff has, in that you can sometimes get trapped down these long hallways. The hallways usually don't have very much loot either way, so you'll usually be looting in the main center areas over here. Next up, we're talking about containment. Oh shit! I just lost the view, but it's fine. Regardless, containment is one of my personal favorite areas to land. In this area, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... Yeah, you've got 6 buildings to loot from. On top of that, you have some bins scattered all around. This is definitely an area you can expect at least 1 team to land with you, but there's a very high chance you'll end up grabbing the weapons you need. Personally, my favorite thing about this area are the rotations. It's super easy to be able to rotate towards spotted lakes, pit, or all the way straight up through cage in a matter of seconds using this jump tower. Because of these super powerful rotations and high tier loot, I'm a big fan of containment. One of the major downsides of the area is that if you're not careful, you're going to startle these things. And they're very loud. They can definitely attract some enemies to your location. But as long as you're careful, that shouldn't be that big of an issue. So the rig is going to be another A tier on the list. The primary reasons that I like this place are that the loot is very well placed. You've got 1, 2, 3, and then 4 loot locations, as well as a few scarce bins that you can actually grab. This is one of the places that if you land contesting a team, you know you'll be able to grab the weapons you need in order to take that fight. In every house, well, let's count real quick. We got 1, 2, 3. 3 guns, there's 4. We've got number 5. Number 6 and number 7. So there's enough guns in this building alone to kit up your entire squad, which is definitely what you like to see. So the actual layout, loot placement, and the actual loot itself is very, very good in the rig. Another thing that makes this place so great is that it has a very low third-party potential. You might find some teams coming from Broken Relay Capacitor or this No Name, but it's pretty easy to avoid them by taking a balloon tower or by simply running away. This area is usually off the grid since it avoids the majority of the drop paths, so you'll rarely see more than 1 or 2 teams landing here. The only downsides of the rig that I can think of are that teams can hold this high ground position on you pretty well, and that can definitely be very annoying. The best way to counter something like that would just be to bunker up in any of these houses, and you'll probably be pretty safe. So all of that is... oh wow, I almost died. So all of that is why the rig is another A tier on the list. Alright, so the next spot on our list is Skulltown. You OGs may remember Skulltown back when it was a little different, but this version is my personal favorite since you're guaranteed to have some pretty high tier loot just like this purple shield. Skulltown is definitely an S tier on my list and I just died. Oh. So the next spot let's talk about is Crypto Map Room. This is the only no-name location I'm going to talk about, and the only reason is because this wasn't always a no-name location. I really don't know why they took the name off of the map for this spot, because it definitely deserves it. Crypto Map Room is an obvious S tier because of this right here. If I open up my map, you can now see that every single enemy on the entire map has been pinged for me on my map. I know where teams are, if they're fighting. I can even see a mini-map that shows all of this information in front of me. That feature is great, but on top of that, the loot here is usually very, very good. If you land here alone, your whole team can easily get fully kitted, and even if you have teams landing on you, you'll easily be able to find enough loot. So the next spot on the list is going to be Gauntlet, also known as the Octane Town Takeover. This is one of my personal favorite landing locations just because of how fun it is. Being able to jump around on this jungle gym of Octane jump pads is just really fun. It might not be the best in terms of actual fighting, but it just makes the early game really fun. A lot of you may have noticed that it's very difficult to grab this loot now because of the new Octane rework, but in my opinion it's not that big of an issue. You can obviously always expect a purple or golden item out of this center area. Other than that, the loot here is not bad, but it's nothing that special. So in terms of ranked, this area might be a bit difficult to land because your loot is going to be pretty slow. You can't exactly land straight onto the floor and grab a bunch of weapons, mostly because most of the loot is actually in supply bins. Because most of the loot is in supply bins, you're going to be contested a lot of times in ranked games where people will land directly with you and try to steal the loot out of your own supply bins. So this area might not be the best for ranked, but in my opinion it's very fun for pubs. The next spot on the tier list is going to be labs, and I think by now most of you are catching on to the idea that any area that has a special feature is going to be an S tier location. That's of course the case again for labs, and this time it's because of the Portal Jump Tower. The Portal Jump Tower allows you to run away from teams, third-party teams, find better positioning, or outrun zone, anything. This area is a really fun landing location because of how chaotic it can get. That also means it can get pretty frustrating if there's too many teams here. If you're a fast-paced player who likes chaotic landings, this is definitely the place for you. If you end up walking inside of the labs, chances are you're not walking back out. Personally, I'm a big fan of the chaotic landings, so I like this area quite a bit. But if you're a slower-paced player or somebody who doesn't really like to land that hot, this is definitely a place you're going to want to avoid. The loot on the outside is definitely good. You can expect some high tier shields and some high tier weapons out of the main building, but this area is usually contested by at least a team. The other buildings outside aren't usually as fortunate as the center one, but the actual main attraction, the underground labs, here's where you can find quite a bit of high tier loot. You'll definitely be able to find some shields, attachments, and weapons, anything that you and your whole team is going to need to become fully kitted. But again, be careful because this place can easily get swarmed and overwhelmed by third parties or just a ton of teams, so you're going to want to try to rotate out of here as soon as you can. So the next spot on the list is going to be Capacitor. Capacitor is going to be an S tier location in pubs, but I'm going to drop it to an A tier if you're playing ranked. I'll explain why, but the main reasons I like this place are that it has a ton of loot. There are tons of buildings, the area is very large, you even have another one of those cargo holds that's going to just add to the amount of loot you can grab. On top of that, they're home to one of the most unique features of Kings Canyon, the charge towers. Using this, you can instantly get your ultimate, so if you're playing somebody like Lifeline, using this you can guarantee yourself a few purple shields. So what are the downsides of the area then? Well, for one thing, it's very large, meaning if you're playing ranked, it's very difficult to manage your surroundings. Your back is walled off, meaning it's sort of difficult to run away from third parties that are coming from the front. You can easily expect third parties from Rig, Relay, Labs, Swamps, Cage. This area is in the center of a bunch of hot drops, so it's very easy to get third party in this area. But with the amount of loot you can grab here, I think you shouldn't have too many hardships fighting a lot of teams. So the next spot on the list is going to be Swamps. Swamps is one of those areas that I think people underestimate quite a bit. It's extremely rare that I'll find that many teams landing here. As you can see, there's one guy, but literally only one guy. He doesn't even have his whole team here. Because of that, I think this area is perfect for ranked. It's even great if you're a slower paced pubs player who's trying to play for the wins and wants to take their time looting up. With Swamps, if you end up having a team land on you, you'll definitely have enough time to loot up because of the sheer size of the area. It has the most buildings of any area on the map, so loot is definitely not going to be any issue. Because of the size of Swamps, third parties, if they even come for you, are going to take quite a while. So you're definitely going to have time to heal up or do whatever you need to prepare for another fight. And if you can't take that fight, you can easily rotate out using the balloon tower, which is covered by the trees, or you can run away. There's tons of rotations out of Swamps through Hydro Dam, Labs, Repulsor Tower. On top of all of that, the loot here is very high tier. So I would say Swamps is the best place to land if you're a slower paced player or if you're playing ranked. So the next spot on the list, it's another new one. We're talking about Crash Site. Just simply looking at the sheer size of the area, it has enough loot for, what, maybe 6 to 8 teams. The layout of the area is very well thought out. I definitely enjoy fighting here. This upper area is especially important because it has at least 2 blue shields. These sometimes are traded for 2 purple shields. Loot is definitely not a problem in this area since there is so much space, but that sheer amount of space is potentially one of the things that makes this place a bit of a hazard. Since it's so large, it's easy to have a ton of teams land here. Because of that, it can get extremely chaotic very easily. You're gonna have to play safe and very smart when you take fights in this place, just because you can easily have teams hiding in any of these other areas. The rotations out of this area are pretty solid. You can rotate through artillery towards containment or towards spotted lakes. Either one of those are usually fairly safe. Because this place is on the far side of the map, you won't expect too many third parties, but you can definitely expect a lot of teams to land here. So I think that does it. That's all 20 named locations on the Season 8 Kings Canyon map. I'll leave the full map tier list up on your screen so you can take it all in. But if you actually enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like. And only about 1% of my viewers are actually subscribed, so feel free to do that as well. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you learned something new, and peace out.